War movies love to say based on a true story, but some of them might as well say based on complete bullshit. From fake Nazi shootouts to insulting rewrites of real heroes, these 10 films didn't just get it wrong, they mangled history so badly, veterans called for boycotts, prime ministers condemned them, and critics shredded them in public. Let's talk about the worst offenders. Dean Devlin wanted a Top Gun for World War I. What he made was pure fan fiction. Flyboys tells the story of the Lafayette Escadrille, American pilots who volunteered to fly for France before the U.S. entered World War I. But everything from the planes to the dogfights to the characters plays out like a video game. German pilots all fly red triplanes like they're the Red Baron, and the lead villain literally carves kill marks into his plane like he's in a Saturday morning cartoon. It got even worse, actually. Critics noticed the film's military advisor was later outed as a fraud. Turns out he'd fabricated a bunch of facts just to boost his own credibility. Devlin claimed the changes were for aesthetics. Audiences didn't buy it. Budget was $60 million and box office just $17 million. John Woo tried to make a war movie about the Navajo code talkers, but you'd be forgiven for forgetting that part. The premise should have been straightforward. During World War II, Navajo Marines developed an unbreakable code based on their language. But instead of showing how vital that was, Windtalkers turns into a generic shoot-'em-up. Nicolas Cage plays a white soldier assigned to protect a Navajo coder, but the film invents a rule that his mission is to kill the code talker if capture is likely. That's not just wrong, it's insulting. The U.S. military never gave that order. Woo's action instincts took over, and what could have been an incredible story became a jumbled mess of slow-mo gunfire and melodramatic shouting. Critics weren't kind. Navajo veterans were furious, and the movie bombed hard. They spent $115 million making it, and the movie grossed just $77 million. There's no shortage of war movies that twist the facts, but Enemy at the Gates hits a special nerve, especially if you ask Russian veterans. The film tells the story of Vasily Zaitsev, a famous Soviet sniper, but turns him into something closer to a comic book superhero than a real soldier. It invents a one-on-one sniper duel with a German major that never existed. It shows Red Army troops charging without rifles, a myth borrowed from other battles, not from Stalingrad. Russian historians tore into it for turning the Battle of Stalingrad into a Western caricature. Veterans hated the way Soviet officers were portrayed as cruel, almost cartoonishly so. The Russian media panned it, and the domestic box office bombed. Western critics were mixed. Some liked the drama, others called it a war romance with zero interest in accuracy. Based on Anthony Swofford's memoir, Jarhead was meant to show the psychological toll of Gulf War deployment, but it didn't sit well with people who actually served. Former Marine Nathaniel Fick slammed the movie for making Marines look unhinged and unstable, saying most of what the film shows would never happen in a real unit. It paints the soldiers as volatile and emotionally fried, which he called preposterous. Veterans felt the movie exaggerated the boredom and alienation while barely touching on actual combat. Some called it offensive, others just found it boring. The tone was anti-war, sure, but it meandered without much payoff, and compared to other war films of its era, the box office returns were underwhelming. This movie sparked full-on outrage in Britain, and it's not hard to see why. The film shows American sailors capturing the German Enigma machine in 1942, but in reality the British Royal Navy pulled that off in 1941, and even that wasn't the first crack. The Poles were the first to break Enigma, years earlier. So why does the movie rewrite history? Hollywood logic. But even Tony Blair, then British Prime Minister, called the film an affront to the memory of British sailors who died on the real mission. The film did okay financially in the US, but the UK press coverage was brutal. British veterans boycotted it, and military historians still bring it up when talking about bad historical revisionism in mainstream cinema. Everything about this one feels off, and veterans noticed. Most of the tanks shown in the Battle of the Bulge were post-war U.S. patents painted to look like German Tigers. It was filmed in sunny Spain instead of the snow-covered terrain of Belgium. And weather? Flat, dry terrain with good visibility, nothing like the icy nightmare of the real battle. Strategically, the film takes wild liberties with troop movements and simplifies the whole thing into random tank fights. Reviews at the time called it bloated and implausible. Veteran groups in both the US and Europe slammed it for misleading audiences, especially younger viewers. It tried to be an epic, but ended up as a technical mess with a long runtime and little respect for historical accuracy. Red Tails wanted to be a tribute to the Tuskegee Airmen, the first all-black fighter squadron in U.S. history. Instead, it turned into a shallow, overproduced cartoon version of their legacy. The film claims the airmen had a perfect bomber protection record, but that's not true. Archival data shows they lost more than 25 bombers in combat. The real story is still heroic, but it didn't need this kind of sugarcoating. Dogfights look like they came from a video game, not World War II. The film compressed years of missions into a couple of oversimplified action scenes. Fictional characters replaced actual historical figures. Reviews were mostly negative. Critics pointed to wooden dialogue, thin characterizations, and flat storytelling. Even some surviving Tuskegee veterans said they were disappointed. They wanted a story that reflected their real experiences, not a Hollywood cartoon. Michael Bay's idea of historical drama is simple. Explosions first, facts later. Pearl Harbor wants to be a sweeping war epic and a love triangle at the same time, and it ends up being neither. Ben Affleck plays an American pilot who's somehow flying missions for the RAF before the U.S. even enters the war. That never happened. Commanders are shown golfing while they know the Japanese attack is coming. Again, didn't happen. And then there's the endless slow-mo, the romantic subplot that won't die, and the conveniently attractive extras on every battlefield. Bay tried to repeat Titanic with this one. Critics called it tone-deaf. Historians were appalled. It still made money thanks to international markets, but nobody walked out feeling proud of what they'd seen. John Wayne's Vietnam War fantasy is perhaps the worst Vietnam War movie ever made. By the late 60s, most war movies were shifting tone, getting darker, more realistic, more skeptical. But Wayne wasn't having any of that. The Green Berets is Vietnam through a World War II lens, complete with noble Americans and cartoonishly evil enemies. It wasn't subtle. It was propaganda. The Pentagon helped. Wayne's goal was to counter all the anti-war media of the era. What he made instead was a tone-deaf mess full of bad dialogue, stiff acting, and simplistic moralizing. Critics called it absurd, and Roger Ebert absolutely destroyed it in his review. The Green Berets simply will not do as a film about the war in Vietnam. It is offensive not only to those who oppose American policy, but even to those who support it. What we certainly do not need is a movie depicting Vietnam in terms of cowboys and Indians. That is cruel and dishonest and unworthy of the thousands who have died there. This one is a great thriller, but a terrible war film. Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker won Best Picture, but ask any Iraq vet and they'll tell you it's pure fiction. The movie follows a bomb squad unit that charges into danger like cowboys, ignoring all protocol, risking lives for no reason. In real life, these units were tightly coordinated. They didn't freelance into enemy zones without backup. The biggest complaint came from veterans who said the film portrayed soldiers as adrenaline junkies who were reckless, insubordinate, and borderline suicidal. That wasn't just false, it was insulting. Bigelow said she wanted to explore addiction to war. Fair enough, but when you sell that narrative as the Iraq War story, you're rewriting history. The military hated it. Iraq veterans panned it. And despite the Oscars, the backlash was serious enough that many commanders banned screenings on base.